All right, everyone. I'm excited to introduce my next guest, recovering stand up comic, veteran TV writer and producer, the Comedy Central Roast, the Arsenio Hall Show, Lopez Tonight, and so much more. We're diving deep with Chris McGuire. Hey.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Oh, great to have you. Quite a comedy pedigree you have. You've done all my favorite Comedy Central roasts. Those are
Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, you've done so many. I mean, it's just like I want to dive into that, but you started out as a stand-up comic. Like, how'd you get into funny, and when did you know you were funny? Like,
Well, it's a trap. So when I got out of college, I moved to Boston, had a regular job. I worked in technology. I mean, back then the computers had cranks on the side. I was in sales and then I moved into product marketing. And then one day the company got bought out and a bunch of people marched in. And I decided I didn't want to be there anymore. And they kind of let me know that that was okay. So I took the opportunity to jump into stand up. I had been doing it for a couple of years. I had done some improv, and then one of my roommates at the time, I had moved into a new place, was a stand up comedian. He came by one of my shows and he goes, "Hey, you're pretty funny. Why don't you try stand up?" So it was just kind of on a lark. What I quickly realized was it was way easier than working with a bunch of people because you just show up, everything. You don't have to worry about rehearsals. You don't have to worry about everybody being there. You don't have to write scripts for multiple people. It's just you, a microphone, and a group of intoxicated audience members. The first time I did it, it went great. I don't know why. It just did. It was like magic. So that's what convinced me I was funny. But then I bombed for like 6 straight months afterwards, chasing the dragon. Yeah, I guess it was just the belief that I did great that first night that convinced me that I could keep doing it. And it took me a while. A lot of people would have quit.
there's something about that first time doing stand-up where you don't know what to expect, right? So you don't have any of those preconceived notions in your head. Once you know they laugh, the next time you get up there, you're kind of
That's the expectation. The expectation is, the joke I always tell is I showed up for that second open mic with a book just for autographs. You know what I mean? I was ready to roll. In 6 months, I was going to be, sipping Mai Tais with Eddie Murphy. I was going to quit my job. That all those crazy expectations came crashing down over the next 6 months.
when I started doing stand up, that they told me that was the third show for me that happened. I knew it was bad when the first show I had no expectations, so it was amazing.
Yeah,
Right.
right,
And then we had
right,
like this thing where we had all the, like showcase. And so that was fun because I had a
right.
lot of support. And then the third one, my wife, I know it was bad because my wife came up to me and said, "Wow, if I was you, I'd be crying right now."
Somebody on my LinkedIn, Ray Engen, who also did stand up, he's like a sales offer coach now. He said the real test is if when you think you're funny, the real test is like the seventh show or the sixth show when your friends stop showing up. Then you find out whether or not that's when reality comes crashing down. But for me, it happened in the second show.
That's exactly the advice that Mark Ridley gave me, the Mark Ridley's comic cast. So he's like, "Jeff, you got to stop inviting people. We got to find out if you're really funny."
Yep. Yep. I mean, the clubs love it because you're bringing audience members in and they're drinking and paying and all that stuff, the bringer shows. But in reality, it doesn't do you a favor beyond the fact that you're known as a guy that can bring people into the room.
Right, right. I never loved the bringer shows. It was always the
Oh,
worst.
the worst.
The
And
worst.
then if you brought a lot of people, they put you on last because they knew if you were on like first or second, that the audience would leave after you were done.
Oh yeah, and that happens. I did a show with someone and it was a small, I mean, no one was there, so half the audience was for him and they left when he left. And
Yeah.
that was 15 years ago and I still hate him for it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's miserable.
So were you a comic in Boston? Is that
Yes. Yeah, I'm
okay?
from Long Island originally. I ended up in Boston because I went to college in Maine and I ended up in Boston. And Boston had at the time, not so much now, but at the time it really had kind of a legendary comedy scene. Dennis Leary, Kevin Meaney, Bobcat, went through there. And then after that, like Bill Burr, Dane Cook, there were a lot of people who went through there. So it was a city that liked comedy. They liked it a certain way. And if you could unlock that, you'd get, laughs. But the real skill was following all the really great comics there, because they would, I don't know if they have this where when you were doing, are you still doing it?
I haven't done as much since COVID. No.
Gotcha. Okay. The format in Boston was headliner host. So the headliner would host the show. And this started because when Boston started, there was like 2, 3 funny people. That's it. They needed to have somebody host the show who was great. And so that was the format. If you were a newer comic, you'd have to follow, like Lenny Clark or Mike Donovan or whoever doing like 20 killer minutes. And you had to learn, and fast. I mean, these guys were fast. You had to learn to survive that. And that's why there's a lot of comics that came out of Boston from that time period that had a very identifiable style.
Yeah, in Michigan, it was least experienced, a little more experienced headliner, the MC feature. And then in Canada, they did it reverse. The feature hosted, and I didn't know that. And I went there and I'm like, wow, they featured me. And I was like, I don't have any experience compared to that.
That's hilarious. It's actually not a bad format if you think you take somebody who's experienced enough to know how to warm up the room, bring up somebody new so that they're not like being thrown on the grenade, as we used to call it, and then going on in the middle before the headliner. So just in case everything can get smoothed over it's not a bad format.
No, it actually makes more sense to have someone with a little experience controlling the tone of the show. Absolutely.
Yes.
From Boston, when did you get into writing for TV?
I moved from Boston to LA to write. To do stand up, but ultimately to write. I just knew that was kind of just in terms of my style. I knew that, and that's what everybody told me. They're like, "You're a great writer," blah blah blah, whatever. So I got there, and it took a while. It took me 3 years to get some kind of shady job. And it took me 5 years before I got, something that set me up for the rest of my career there.
What do you consider your first big break, or the thing that led to the big break? The Man Show was
I'm embarrassed to say this, but it was the Man Show. And it wasn't even the Jimmy and Adam Man Show. It was the Joe Rogan and Doug Stanhope Man Show. Jimmy and Adam left. I think Jimmy went off to do his late night show. And then they had Joe and Doug come in, and different personalities. Jimmy and Adam treated that room like a bear hug. You know what I mean? Every Sunday. And, Joe and Doug, it was not a bear hug. It was more of a prank situation. It's like, don't get up to go to the bathroom. Something bad might happen when you get back.
And you were there for what, like a season?
Just a season. I think technically the way they broke it, I did 22 episodes. The way they broke it up, I think it might have been 2 seasons. It was 22 episodes. Yeah. But I learned a lot because the head writer came from SNL. So it was a great first job because it wasn't a sit at your desk job. It was pitch ideas, write ideas, work in a room, work a little at the desk, but then you would go produce your piece. You'd go out with the director, and you would, in these kinds of shows, the directors often are writers, but in this particular show, not even. And you'd go out and you go, okay, here are the beats. This is what we're doing. This is the idea, blah, blah, blah. And then you would take that and go to the editor, do the cut that my boss would see. So you kind of own the whole thing from soup to nuts. And that was, there are other shows that do that, but a lot of them don't. And then you end up being kind of a desk guy, and then you kind of hit a ceiling. So for me, this was a great, because I learned everything in that first job. I was thrown in the deep end. It was crazy.
How did you end up at the Man Show? Like, what was the path that got you?
I knew Joe.
You knew Joe?
Yeah, I knew Joe. I opened for Joe for a while. I got the call at the last minute. Like at the last minute, I was like, I'm not going to get a call. Everybody I know is like going in. And then I got a call, hey, you want to come down and interview? I'm like, great. When? 1:00. So I had just come back from Runyon Canyon, like hiking. I was sweaty, all this stuff. It might have been 11, maybe 11:30. I showered up. I was just thinking, I knew I had to pitch ideas. I just like started writing that in the car. I had like a fucking parking ticket and, writing ideas on the parking ticket and all this stuff. And so I think I had 5 ideas. 2 or 3 of them were good. Like Doug really liked them. They were ones that Doug really responded to. And then I just got the job. It was only because I had to pull it together real fast. The lesson I learned after that is have all your ideas ready to go, even if don't have the interview, because you never know when that's going to happen. Be ready, be prepared.
Be prepared. TV boys.
Weebelows, whatever that is.
Yeah. Weebelows, exactly. Weebelows. I think Weebelows is the things that don't fall if you knock them over.
Yes.
Weebles.
I believe it stands for We Be Loyal Scouts, which is, if they're still doing it, that's not good.
Wait, so your next big thing was Mind of Mencia. I remember seeing Mencia in concert. Like, he was part of the Virus tour when Opie and Anthony were touring, and I think he closed actually. And he was hilarious. Like,
yeah, he's a powerful comic.
Really, really funny. I remember just sitting there rolling.
But technically, like from a pure like technique standpoint, he's got a huge bag of tricks. I've never really seen anybody, and I mean that in a complimentary standpoint. Like technically, he had just a lot of moves. A lot of comedians don't have. He had a lot of moves. Yeah.
What was it like working on the Mind of Mencia? Like, what was the process like behind the scenes compared to like the Man Show and then later Lopez Tonight?
Well, everything came from his head, literally. So like, thus the name. You would pitch him ideas. He was very much interested in his ideas. And so a lot of it was serving his point of view. But I did very much like similar stuff I did on the Man Show, which was I took, when Robert Morton was the showrunner, he was Letterman's executive producer for, I think, 17 years, or co-executive producer. The writer's room didn't have like a culture at the time, meaning like what I was describing, like, are you a desk guy or a end-to-end guy? And so I just found myself bored. So I just would go to the edit bay and hang out with the editor and work with the directors and stuff. And that kind of sort of became the model. So I kind of just brought that, Man Show model or at least the SNL model there.
Jeff Ross, The Burn with Jeff Ross.
Yeah.
I got to open for Jeff Ross once. It was
Jeff's fun.
He's a solid dude.
Yeah.
And I remember being so nervous because I think, how do I say this? I've worked with famous people like Gilbert Gottfried or whatever, but Jeff Ross was the most famous when I worked with them. Like he was at like the height of his Jeff Rossness. I was so
Like when was this?
This was like
2000?
Before COVID.
Okay, all right, before COVID. Okay.
So
yeah,
the height of Gilbert, like the roast masters and that.
Everybody loved Gilbert. Gilbert was like, for the writers we'll get to the roast, but for the writers on the roast, Gilbert was always a dream to write for.
But watching Jeff Ross do the roast live, he would bring people on stage.
Yeah, like speed roasting.
Yeah, it was still one of the greatest things I ever got to see right up close. It was
that muscle that he has, like that insult comedy speed roasting thing is, it's well honed. Yeah, people love that speed roasting thing because it looks like magic. You know what I mean? It looks like, it's like in speaking when you hot seat someone, or you're a coach and you're hot seating a business entrepreneur, or like I hot seat storytellers and stuff like that. It all looks like magic, and but what you're doing is, and the same thing with Jeff is you're working your frameworks. You know what I mean? Like he has in his head, a little file that he's going through at light speed to do it, and it looks like magic. But it's a lot of practice and a lot of work goes into that.
Yeah, he's definitely a master, definitely. With the Comedy Central roast, you do them while you're doing other things, right? Because coming up is like Arsenio Hall. But
that's where I like the gap around 29 to 2010 or in there somewhere. There were a lot of roasts, and I didn't do them because I was at Lopez. So I didn't have, I couldn't take off 4 weeks to go do a roast. So yeah, you generally do them in, the off season, and you usually get very little notice because they'll bag somebody. It's really hard to get somebody to agree to this. And when they do, they just go full on like, all right, let's get the production design, let's get the promotion, let's get the writers, all that stuff. And it all comes together in the writer's room in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I remember I was at, I don't think it wasn't one of your roasts. I was at the Comedy Central in New York, and Amy Schumer was at the Comedy Cellar practicing. I think it was her Roseanne Barr, if my memory serves
She
correctly.
did Roseanne Barr. She also did Charlie Sheen. That was the one where she was the standout. That was her like standout moment.
For some reason, I'm remembering Roseanne. Like she came in and just started practicing it, and I'm like, this is the coolest thing. It was cool to be able to see that. But you've done
a lot of comedians do that now. That wasn't always the case. I don't know who the first one to do that. I don't know if it was Amy. I don't know if it was Jeff. Nikki Glazer did that. She runs her roast monologues, dozens of times before she steps on the stage. First of all, the crowd loves it. It's smart because you're figuring out what your strongest material is. It's not 100% perfect because, you're, a lot of times they'll set up little signs. They'll literally have like bring up seats and put signs on them and then point to the seat or whatever, depending on, who's practicing. The people that practice are the ones that do the best and get rehired over and over again. Whitney Cummings, she's another one who did that. The ones who worked really hard and really worked their monologue were always the ones that did the best.
I mean, just to rattle off a few and then we'll hone in.
Yeah,
but
sure.
like, I know you're the head writer for the Justin Bieber one, but you were also part of Shatner, Flavor Flav, Bob Saget, Joan Rivers, Larry the Cable Guy, Charlie Sheen.
Yeah.
There was a Cheech and Chong in there.
There's Cheech and Chong. Yeah.
I mean, these were always like my favorite things to watch. Like even as like doing comedy, if we ever did roasts, those are always the best kind of jokes to write.
You get permission to be, it's the one night of the year that you get permission to be not appropriate, mean, all that stuff. There's Jeff used to say it, and I really thought I took this with me after I worked with him, was there's a social contract in a roast. Like, I'm going to make fun of you, and my goal is to try to make you laugh, and then you're going to get up and make fun of me, and I'm going to laugh. Right? Agreed? That social contract is what makes these things not turn into, people running off the stage crying because they can get murderous.
There's definitely some that look like they would have or should have stung pretty hard. But
yeah.
But I mean, there's definitely, some like rest in peace. Greg Giraldo was like the master. I mean, something in the roast died a little bit when he died. I mean, it was just like, he was so smooth and so good.
I invite anybody who's listening, who's a fan of the roast, to go to YouTube or look at those roasts from 2002 until he passed, which I'm not even sure when it was, probably pre-2015 for sure. And he always went on first, always went up, which was a hard spot because it's a really tough spot. He always went on first. The writing was always devastatingly good. And the delivery was fast and hard and just absolutely amazing. The best one, in my opinion, and the other roast writers, agree, was the Larry the Cable Guy roast. He went up and you could tell he was so personally frustrated with the success of Larry the Cable Guy. So it crossed over into something a little personal, but that anger fueled this amazing set that got, like, again, first guy up after the host and just like applause breaks. And the biggest applause break wasn't even a joke. He just went, "Why are you so famous?" He just screamed it, and the crowd was just like, it was amazing. But yeah, he was great. When he would send in his set, right? So he'd send in his script, everything stopped in the writer's room. Everything. We would sit down and somebody would read his set. And it was always a mix of, oh my God, like, that's the most amazing thing, or I wish I had written, because it was right there. Like he saw it. It was right there, and we all missed it. So that was always a really fun time to do that. That was always fun.
He was just so good, so good. And so he would write his own thing. How many of the people would write their
Well,
own?
he did have a buddy who helped him named Jesse Joyce, who is on Kimmel now. And he's been on Kimmel for a long time, and he worked on The Burn with Jeffrey Ross. So pretty much all the comedians who go up, who kill, have at least one writer. At least, because they know it's super high stakes. And they also know it's like nuclear weapons. They know everybody else has, is doing 3 writers sessions or paying 5 writers. So it's like, if you don't do it, you're at a disadvantage.
What do you do when the inevitable same joke comes up, right? I mean, because you're dealing with the same topic. So it's not like there's going to be like-minded thinking. If you're talking about Justin Bieber, there's more than one monkey joke that's going to come up.
Yes. The monkey joke was the one that I didn't think was going to be the through line, but it really was. I mean, we ended on him with the monkey. Are you asking like how they deal with it in real time, or what goes into that before the show starts?
Well, more before, like you're aware of everyone's acts, right? So
yes, because they have to go standards and practices, right? And legal. Everybody's set has to be looked over by legal, even though it could be edited. They just don't want anything that's going to get somebody sued. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if like the first guy goes up and he says, or the first guy's script has a monkey joke, you know how it is. Like once the premise hits, it's like there's only, you got to really come strong with another monkey joke, I would imagine.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but what if someone, it's like, well, hey, Gilbert, Greg's got this joke, like maybe we'll just focus you, like do you do they just film them and then you can always edit out the one?
No, because the vibe in the room is so important, right? That you don't want the audience's reaction to be, oh, the monkey again. You know what I mean? You want them from the jump. So that's one reason why going up early is great, because you've got the entire thing. There is a little bit of horse trading. Like, so the lineup is the most important thing. Is like, okay, when is Gilbert going up? Well, Gilbert would always go up towards the end, because it would be insane to put him on in the middle, because it would wreck the show, because and no one would want to go on after him and the whole deal. So you need to put the most famous person on after Gilbert, which would be the person who's being roasted. Gilbert's at the end. Gilbert was kind of easy because we could just write to his voice. You know what I mean? We could just write crazy to his voice, and that carried a lot, and he was kind of a character. So you're almost writing a character piece. For everybody else, there's a little bit of, okay, when am I going up? And everybody wants that middle spot in the show. The showrunner decides. So, if you're on first, that, you just have to worry about the roast master stepping on your material. If you're on second, you're probably safe. What we would do is, if people had similar jokes, there would be a conversation. It would be like, hey, Jeff's got this joke too. Hey, Jeff, would you mind if so-and-so's got this joke, they really need it for their set, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times people are really gracious and they go, yeah, no problem. No problem. I'll take mine out. Other times, not so much. Like sometimes people really fall in love with their material and they're like, no, I'm telling that joke. You tell them to drop their joke. And then it becomes horse trading. Like the person, to control any bad feelings, is the writers would always, if we pulled somebody's joke or if we asked them to drop a joke, we would send them a page of jokes to replace it. And usually they were pretty happy with what we sent, and that made everybody kind of happy. If you were paying attention, if you do the work beforehand, the best people are like, well, if I'm going to do a monkey joke, I'm going to make sure it's the best monkey joke and it's different and it's surprising and it comes out of left field and all that other stuff. If you're in the middle of the show and somebody goes rogue and decides, screw it, I'm going to do that joke they told me to drop anyway. And then that person is like, oh shit, now I've got to recalibrate. But at the end of the day, it sucks, but it's not so bad because It's not so bad because you do have time to fix it, like in breaks and stuff like that. You can go back to the prompter and say, pull that out or put this joke in. That's when the writers will kind of huddle up and help, stuff like that. So yeah, that's it. It's basically make sure there aren't too many of a single, like when with the Bieber roast, I think I was the first head writer ever to do this. Was I spent a couple of days and just created a briefing sheet for the writers. And I go, look, there's more to Justin Bieber than the monkey. Here's 100 angles on Justin Bieber. This was really good for writers because the hardest part is the angle. So you're looking at 100 angles of jokes. You're like, oh, well, I'll hit that one. That's fun. That was one way I tried to spread it out. So it wasn't just, at least from the writer's room, we weren't writing 100 jokes about the monkey. Anybody who doesn't know this story about Justin and the monkey is really lost right now. Justin adopted a monkey. I don't know where he was, but he left it in that country and it was a big scandal.
Couldn't he not take it back or something? Like it got stuck there, or it was in Germany or something.
It was in Germany. I don't know the details. It probably was, it had to be a customs issue, right?
Right. You know, crazy kids doing crazy things. The original roasts that we used to watch on Comedy Central were Friars Club roasts.
Yeah. The roast started with the Friars Club.
Did they stop doing it, or Comedy Central decided we're not going to air those? We're just going to do our own thing?
I think that happened. They started with the Friars Club roasts, and then they just did their own thing. You know, I'm not privy to the behind the scenes. I imagine someone was unhappy.
I was just curious. All right. So your first one's William Shatner.
Yeah.
So how much, like, when Jason Alexander is like the roast master, like, does he get the script just like that? Or if someone's going to be a roast master, are they writing their own stuff? Are they actively involved?
They're absolutely involved. The smart ones, it's kind of like, you know, everything you've read about SNL. The smart hosts give themselves over to the show. They don't try to fight the show. Anyone who tries to fight the show usually struggles. It's very collaborative. It isn't like, here's your script, say it. It's, you have to get buy-in, and we're like, hey, we were thinking this, and here's a monologue. And if you don't like anything, it's gone. We'll replace it. If you have an idea for something, we'll riff on it and write something for you. It's pretty collaborative, but these are usually very busy people. So most of them didn't have time to like sit in a writer's room. But like Seth MacFarlane, you know, had all those Family Guy writers, I'm sure, not all of them, but some help him. And his roast master monologues were always great. They were always really good. And Jason's was good if I remember. Yeah, I remember him that was my first roast. So I think I just wrote intros. I think I just wrote those insulting intros.
What was your evolution of becoming head writer on the Bieber one over time? Like you just keep writing more, and then they finally tap you on the shoulder?
Well, it started, there weren't that many writers. Basically, everybody kind of reported to the showrunner. And there was no, there were a couple of guys who kind of were defining the voice. So there was a lot of deference. And then eventually the rooms got big enough that they needed somebody to manage it. There was a head writer who worked there for a really long time until his name was Ray James. After Charlie's roast, he went to do whatever that show was called, Anger Management. He pretty much did it up until then. So then they would have different people come in. It's a hard job, and it's a lot of traffic. It's a lot of, you've got 9-10 scripts. That sounds about right. That you've got to manage drafts of. So a lot of your day is managing drafts, having them read with the showrunner, or having, somebody on the phone and you're having them read it, or you're reading stuff to them or whatever. So a lot of it is that kind of management. And then some of it's taste. A lot of it's taste. I guess I just got my turn. I had just done a pilot for Comedy Central that they liked. It was called Not Safe with Nikki Glazer. Then the show got picked up. I had like 9 months until we were going to start working. So they kept me busy, and they just said, do you want to head write for the roast? And I was like, yeah, sure. That sounds great. I had my own ideas of what I wanted to do from like a 10,000 foot view with it. But yeah, that's how it happened. I think they just liked me at that point.
Speaking of like mastery of roasts, like current reigning queen, Nikki Glazer, my goodness.
She is the hardest work. She's very funny. She's got good taste, and she's a really hard worker.
The Tom Brady roast is like a masterclass, that delivery.
She, I don't know particularly about the Brady one, but I believe the story was that for her first Golden Globes monologue, that she rehearsed it 90 times in front of audiences. Like she just did it that many times because she knew it was going to be a high stakes gig that most people fail at, right? Think about who's been great hosting the Golden Globes. Probably Billy Crystal, probably Robin Williams, Ricky Gervais, Tina and
Amy.
yeah, Tina and Amy. So, but a lot of people don't do well. It's a tough room.
Yeah, and plus she had like the level of expectation was so high because she was coming off the Tom Brady roast, right? I mean, like she nailed it. Now I think she's just like got that gig forever, hopefully.
Yeah, she definitely from the first time she did it to the second time, like became kind of an insider, which is kind of what you need to do that gig. You kind of need Timothy Chalamet to like know who you like you. You need Steve Martin, like, oh, Steve gave me that joke or whatever, like you need that because that room's rough. That's a rough room.
The host, like the Ricky Gervais stuff, I mean, is brutal, like brutal.
That joke about Epstein the last time he did it, where he did an Epstein joke and then he said, "Don't groan at me, he was your friend." I was like, wow. I look back on it now and I'm like, wow.
I know. But that clip is circulating right now on TikTok all over. Yeah. So do you have any, like, what's your favorite of the ones you did? Do you have one that I'll say your favorite, but I'm just mean like we're just at all the stars align. Like you can have more than one favorite. I'm just
I think I had fun in all of them. None of them, I don't think any of them were no fun. Bieber was great because there was so much buzz, number one, and Martha Stewart's breakout. Like that was the big story of the Bieber roast. So that's probably my favorite. Close second and third are Sheen because there was a lot of stuff. Well, he was 6 months after, Tiger's Blood, but it was still pretty fresh. And he just was good on the prompter, man. I can see why this guy complained about rehearsing. He didn't need it. He could literally just read it off the prompter. I saw him read his rebuttal cold the first time we handed it to him. And I think he flubbed 2 jokes, but that's remarkable. He read it cold and it was funny just coming out of his mouth. And then Larry the Cable Guy, I love. I thought that was a great roast. I got a lot of jokes on that roast. I got a lot of jokes on Sheen too. But I liked like Marsha Brady. We had Marsha Brady on, Maureen McCormick. And I just thought it was really fun to have Marsha Brady be like a roaster. It was just really fun.
So fun. And yes, Martha Stewart, I had to rewatch it again. Really funny. Really, I mean, but to your point earlier, it's like when you kind of give in to the roast, like which she did 1,000%. That's why it was so funny.
Yeah, she only said no to 2 jokes and she was very classy about it and she had good reasons. And that's a pretty crazy set. If you look back on it now, it's like, wow. I mean, it was 10 years ago, 11. The thing about Martha, which is when I work with non-comedians, if I'm working in a ghostwriting capacity or I'm coaching them on, let's say, humor or something, I always say, let the material do the heavy lifting. Don't try to be a stand-up comedian. The moment you do stand-up cadence, no one cares. They're like, this was written. But with Martha, we said to her, this is designed to sound like you're doing Martha Stewart living. Just happens to be the most messed up episode you've ever done. And once we gave her that direction, she was spectacular because she literally just did it like it was Martha. She wasn't trying to be funny. She just was funny.
Yeah, I can see that now that you mention it, because you definitely wrote it like that. Some of her throwaway lines were.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's just, it was a crazy piece of, well, there's a whole story behind that, but there was basically one writer who was responsible for like 80% of it. We really wanted like something that felt super cohesive for her. So I took this guy's Mike Ferrucci's hilarious comedian, writer, great, the best roast writer in my opinion. I was like, I gave him 2 pieces of guidance, and then I said, just go have fun. The first draft comes out, and I'm like, all right, you went a little too crazy. And then I told him that if he ever got tired, I would send in a fresh horse whenever he needed somebody. And so there were a few other people who did some good work on that script, but it sounded like a cohesive piece of humor because there was one mind behind it.
It was great. And that's where she formed that comedic bond with Snoop Dogg?
Snoop. What happened before that was Snoop had been on her show at least once, like years earlier. You know, she was one of the things about Martha Stewart Living, which was interesting, is it was a talk show. Like she'd be making something, but she'd have some famous person come in and she'd interview them while they made brownies or whatever. And so with Snoop, it was actually brownies, which is hilarious. The thing about Martha that's fun, and the reason why she's great with Snoop, is because she's unflappable. Nothing shocks her. I don't think I ever saw her angry, or at least not at me. She's kind of unflappable. And so she's like a walking yes and. You know what I mean? Like if you're an improv person. Although she's a little bit, well, actually, which, because she's an explainer, but she'll go like, well, actually, and then she'll go on her, her thing. Long answer, they knew each other before, but that roast, they hadn't hung out together in a long time. And they were seated right next to each other.
And then you did a whole series with them.
Yeah. Martha and Snoop's Potluck Dinner Party, which I think of all the shows I did, that one had the most impressive press. People were really fascinated by their friendship. You know, they did the New York Times. They did, I don't know if they did the Journal. They did a couple of really big interviews. And I was like, this is insane. Because people were just fascinated with their oddball relationship. And it's 100% real. There's nothing about that. That is not fake or manufactured. That we just got lucky. It just happened.
That's amazing. When you can find like magic in a bottle like that. And
yeah, we got really lucky. Afterwards, I had a bunch of interviews with people who were like, well, we want to do the next, Martha and Snoop. And I'm like, well, good luck, because we got lucky.
One more thing I want to call from the roast is Norm Macdonald.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who could read the phone book to me. I mean, I like he was so funny, but like his non-roast roast is pretty awesome.
Yeah, that non-roast roast was, it was funny. Beforehand, the head writer was like, hey, go down and he thought we were light on like really strong sets. So he's like, oh, go down and talk to Norm and see if you can sell him on this page of jokes. Like, whatever. I think we had read his set. It seemed fine. It was funny, but like not like crazy. So we went down to his trailer, and me and this other writer, Matt Harowitz, who's like a sitcom writer now, we were trying to sell Norm on some jokes, and he's like, nah, I'm all good. That's fine. Thanks for coming by, blah, blah, blah. And we're walking away, and we're all kind of a little sad that Norm wouldn't do one of our jokes or something like that. Then he sticks his head out of the door and goes, on second thought, I'll do that Vietnamese prostitute joke. And we're like, oh, yeah. He's going to do the Vietnamese prostitute joke. Whatever the joke, I didn't even remember what the joke was. Come back, everybody's excited. And it was all fake. The set he sent us was fake. The conversation we had with him was fake. He was going to do that non-roast thing. So nobody knew it was going to happen. And the audience was very confused.
Does that happen a lot where people get up and do jokes that you didn't vet and put through?
No, never happened. It hardly ever happened.
So there isn't any in the moment kind of.
Well, there's definitely, yeah, sure. There's in the moment. I mean, there's lots of things that happen in the moment that you hope happen, like Brady whispering to Jeff, like Kevin Hart ran around the stage a bunch of times. Kevin Hart started roasting people after they were done, which is kind of not the format. He kind of just started riffing and stuff. So yeah, a lot of that stuff happens, but it's strongly discouraged to do what Norm did. And there was nothing objectionable about it. That was the whole point. He was going to do the non-objectionable roast. I think Bob really loved it.
Too funny. Yeah. I mean, there's a million other things, but I also wanted to talk about that human detector cohort that you do. Yep. You help people become funnier, keynote,
Yeah.
all that.
You know what that is I've done a couple of these. I do cohorts like every 6 months. Last summer I did one that was like business oriented, and it was basically for like keynoters. It was like how to write a story that is funny and but builds authority for you at the top of your speech and then in front of your pillars. So it was kind of a little design saying like I'm a big format guy because of TV. So I looked at like Patricia Fripp's keynote model and said, oh, there's like 7 places to put humor in any keynote if you're following that famous model. And so I taught that. And then I decided to do a story program that was just going to be how to make your story funnier, how to write a funny 7-minute story, or how to punch up a funny 7-minute story. And I initially marketed it for contest speakers because the Toastmasters, they start their contesting like January or early February. NSA has a contest and all. Well, my contest people didn't show up. It ended up being a bunch of like speakers who just wanted to learn how to write funnier speeches. Because a lot of times people luck into them. And so I have this sort of framework that I can teach over 6 weeks. And the goal is when you're done, you've got at the very least a much funnier story. The goal is, to have a very funny story.
It's interesting, like how afraid people are to try
Yeah.
and be funny.
Yeah. I think it's the biggest concern. Like I do a little onboarding questionnaire. I'm like, what are your concerns about humor? And bombing's like right at the top. So I usually do a module on safe comedy delivery, and I'll show like a high stakes monologue, and I'll point out all the moves that they do. I usually use Jimmy Kimmel, and I'll point out all of his moves, and I go, you can do all of these. He has designed his delivery for safety. Like he doesn't mind getting a groan or two, but they're built in. He knows they're going to get a groan. He's constructed his whole everything has an exit. He knows when to really land hard on something and when to roll into the next thing. So I usually will teach something like that too. But on the story thing, it's more, we can call them jokes, but I don't teach like joke writing because I don't think that works particularly well for non-comedians. So instead, I teach them like, again, based on the format of a good story, is at every big story element, I have a humorous counterpart and they all work together. The biggest problem, I think you'll understand this, man, is public speakers walk into a room. They don't have a big sign that says comedy behind them. They don't have a drunk audience. That a lot of times don't have good lighting. You know what I mean? There's no one who went on before them who was funny to break the ice. So they're warming the room up for themselves as they speak, right? Which is really hard. And you have to teach people like, hey, that first thing I'm teaching you, you may not get a giant laugh, but it's going to pay off in 3 minutes. It's a lot of teaching confidence and all this other stuff. And that all of those humor beats, I call them, they all work together to create a story that's both emotional and funny. I'm always like, you don't have to use all of them, but they're designed to work together to solve that problem, which is you're warming up for yourself.
Right. You're the MC. You're basically walking in like you're the MC at a comedy club, right?
If you're the opening act, you know what it's like when you have to host your opening or whatever. You're like, your first, unless it's like primetime Saturday or late show Friday, something like that, your first joke is going to get an applause break. You're hoping to get a few laughs, and then you're hoping when you're done with your set, you get an applause break.
Exactly.
Sometimes that comes by saying, that's all my time. And then everybody's like, yes, thank God.
Try the veal.
Yeah.
Chris, thanks for sharing all these stories with me and hanging out with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and if anybody's interested in one of the cohorts or wants to talk to me about one-on-one coaching, I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is Chris McGuire at humordetector.com.
I'll put everything in the show notes so everyone can get your website.
I'm right there. Can I point to it? Let me see. Where's my hand? There we go. My name is right there at humordetector.com. There you go.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. This was fun.